Hello everyone, Joe here, and today we'll be doing what if World War II was reenacted in the modern day. Now, you may not know how this is going to work, and I'll just turn on this layer to show you. So these are all the comparison countries that I have to World War II ones. So let's just do all the major ones. We have America here in Brazil. We have Japan in Iran. We have the Republic of China in Saudi Arabia and Yemen in the People's Republic of China. We have the Soviet Union in India. We have Germany in China. We have the UK in Japan and the France and South Korea. Italy and Russia, and I believe that is all the major ones. At the end, I'll turn back this layer on and say what all the major events compare to, but we'll start off right away in none other than Sri Lanka. So, before the First World War, even though Sri Lanka had been divided between during a war between Iran and India. Sri Lanka had previously India had taken over Sri Lanka, but what the heck? But in this war, Iran had taken over the southern half, and India is still sour about this, so not good relations between these two. But anyway, we start off here in the Middle East, where Iran will invade Afghanistan. They will do this rather well compared to other powers who have attempted it in their past, as well, we all know what happened in Afghanistan during both the Soviet and the American invasions, but yeah, um, Iran will be successful in their attempt taking over Eastern Afghanistan. And then all of Afghanistan. I don't know why I just said Eastern Afghanistan. And they will completely color in the territory of their color. And yeah. Well, we go on over to Arabia now, where the unified Arabian states have been having some troubles of their own, as oh wait, nope, I made a mistake. Have been having some troubles of their own, as Yemen has decided to side with no side in this growing Cold War between China, Italy, and the West, deciding to instead attack Yemen. Well, they didn't decide to attack Yemen. Yemen decided to attack them. I don't know what I was saying there. Trying to take over all of Arabia for themselves. However, taking advantage of this, um, Iranian troops would jump into Iraq and take over the nation rather quickly and would put troops on the border of Kuwait. However, Kuwait had Brazilian presences in it as well as Japanese, South Korean, and Indian presences in it, so it would be hard to take Kuwait. However, they would surround it, not surrender it, and eventually it would be taken over. They would continue pushing into there and would hasten off this area. However, it would remain majorly under the control of the Arabians, until those areas gained de facto independence and de facto left the war, which Iran wasn't very happy about, but who cares about Iran? Over here, China would pressure Taiwan into having a referendum for their independence, and this would be overseen by by PRC officials. However, this wasn't enough, and the day before the referendum results are announced, Chinese troops would take Taiwan and integrate it into China as a whole. This was a direct violation of previous treaties imposed by the Japanese and South Koreans with China. However, they did not take any action. Next, both China and India would sign a non-aggression pact and agree on dividing this area around them. So that will get divided up. China would demand that some northern mountains in Bhutan be given to them, and Japan and South Korea would meet with Chinese officials in Wuhan. However, no Bhutanese officials were invited, and they would call this a betrayal. And a betrayal it was, as the northern mountain lands would be ceded to China, much to the dismay of the Bhutanese. Oh, and there's something I forgot to mention that I'll mention in just a second. But Bhutan will be completely ceded north to the Chinese. And what I forgot to mention was, strangely enough, the only country to condemn the Chinese annexation of Taiwan was Argentina. But anyway, let's get back to the main stuff happening over here. The Japanese leader would return to Japan, stating that he had achieved peace for his time. However, just after this declaration was made, Chinese troops would enter into the remainder of Bhutan somehow and take the country entirely over and entirely annex it. Which, again, there was no Japanese or South Korean response to this. They just condemned the Chinese. But anyway, there's something that we probably should have started with. Now, we're going up to Russia, but this stuff has been happening while all this other stuff is happening. This is not after this stuff happened. Like, the stuff with China was happening while the stuff with Iran was happening. This is happening while the stuff with both Iran and China was happening. But anyway, Russia had recently taken complete control over Georgia, so it is now fighting with them on their side in this conflict. The Russian allies are attacking the and so this is where it was in our borders. This is the modern time border of the Ukraine conflict. So Russian troops will take over much land. However, they are humiliated by the loss of land and troops and money that they're losing in this conflict that they shouldn't have been able to lose. This war should have been easy for Russia, but it was not. However, with aid coming in from some of their um allies, they are finally able to sweep across Ukraine and take the country, though it was at the cost of many lives on both sides, even though this should have been easy. It is integrated as the same status that Georgia or Belarus has onto the Russian side. Russia would then but Russia will completely annex the Baltics with little resistance from them, as they are unlike Belarus or Ukraine or Georgia. They are fully annexed as a part of Russia. Oh, I hate this. Until they are completely under Russian control. Next, the in the Indians and the Chinese would launch a joint invasion of Nepal. They would quickly take India would quickly take the south, which they had been promised, and their pact with China, while China took over the north, which they had been promised. India would also invade the Bangladesh. Um, it, to gain more lands that had been promised to them in the peace treaty. Well, not the peace treaty because it hadn't been peace, but um, the Koreans and the Japanese would condemn this um action and would after a bit of back and forth discussions, sorry, jointly declare war on China and China, saying that they had violated past treaties and a previous pact that had been made between not Italy, Russia, China, and Iran came into effect, defending all three of them and bringing all three of them into war with the Russians. Bangladesh would also, in this peace treaty, be annexed by the Indians. Now, you may have noticed that I didn't say that the Koreans and the Japanese declared war on India. That's because India was, well, India. But anyway, there's something else that we need to discuss with the Indians, and that is their war with um Pakistan. Now they demanded that Pakistan hand over the Kashmir region, and Pakistan said no. So that happened. Indian troops would enter into Pakistan, and since they have more better conventional warfare and that nuclear bombs had were condemned and neither side wanted to use them because of mutually assured destruction. Um, India should have been easily able to win this war. However, it was humiliating for them as Pakistan was pushed them far and even back into their own territory. However, India would push the Pakistanis out, and after much fighting, they would be able to force the Pakistanis into accepting their peace deal, which would be, yup, you guessed it, the entirety of Kashmir going over to the Indians, which had not been on the Pakistani president's agenda to lose all this while he was president. But now he has, and he can deal with his life goals later. But anyway, this will be the border established between the Indians and the Pakistanis. And Pakistan is very angry about this. However, they can't do anything about it. So they just leave the war like that. But anyway, as I said, South Korea and Japan are now at war. China would invade into South Korea, then would quickly sweep through and surround their capital. However, they would put up a fierce fight. Down here, the heck? I don't know why it says that there. But yeah, Papua is Iceland. Um, China would launch swift invasions of the Southlands. Invasions of these countries to the south of them, taking over them after swift conflicts. And also, there's something else I forgot. These are controlled. And also, a bunch of things that I forgot over here. Just a second. Due to major Western positions in these places, oh, I made another mistake. These places are pulled into the war. But, yeah. Russia will launch an invasion through the recently subjugated, I don't actually know what that word means, conquered Baltics. They will invade into the Nordics, taking the capital of Sweden rather quickly. However, they are quickly pushed back by the Nordics in a not in yeah, by the Nordics. I don't know why I was second guessing myself, but which is in another humiliating defeat for the Russians, whose power has been declining ever since the Ethiopian Ukrainian war, and they are almost completely kicked out of the Nordics, and they were only able to take um them back with Chinese aid flowing in through their south. and they were able to kick out these bad influences until there was no more Nordic countries left. Um, they will also launch a failed invasion into the European Union, which is majorly failed, which I just said. Anyway, over here, these people are able to push back. However, Iran easily seizes the coast of these places, and they enter and take the UAE, which is a major, which has a major French presence. Soon they are able to take Oman, which had an even more major French presence, and they and the Americans, who has major presences in Somalia, feels threatened by this, fearing a not Japanese, Iranian attack on their positions here. They will attempt to invade Yemen. However, the Yemenis are very good at defending, and they just decide to focus on Saudi Arabia instead. Over here, the capital of South Korea is captured, and Busan is surrounded. In Busan, Japanese and South Korean troops are desperately trying to flee to Japan's homeland using ships that were lended to them by civilians as well as military ships. And with South Korean troops holding their backs, the Japanese and the South Koreans are able to escape from Busan and land from Japan to defend themselves. Over here, Thailand joins the conflict against the Japanese and South Koreans, yes, after being given some lands from Myanmar, who I also forgot to mention this, India had seized the southern portion of, but they will join as the Chinese and Italians, I mean Russians, are trying to get as many countries on their side as possible. Strangely enough, the next country to join the Red Team will actually be Myanmar, who wants to get their land back from India, who views that as much more valuable land than this land right here. Um, the Chinese had originally planned for an invasion against the Japanese. However, the Japanese, during the Battle of Japan, in which the air forces of Japan and China battled against each other's, the Chinese Air Force would be devastated and the Japanese would win, and their plans for an invasion um of Japan called Operation Manatee were canceled. However, fearing invasion from all sides, the states of Central Asia would be united into the Stani Confederation, which has a bunch of different ethnicities and wouldn't really work well, and it's gonna fall apart, but not yet. The Stani Confederation will stay alive for now. But to the surprise of everybody, something is going to happen that will affect the Standing Confederation. Something that you probably are expecting if you know your World War II history. And even if you don't, you probably should have known what is about to go down with this thing. It will happen very shortly once Uzbekistan agrees to stop patrolling these borders with Kazakhstan in the north, and there we go. This is the Aral Sea is outlined. That's nice. But they will, China, Japan, and Russia will attack India and Afghanistan in a major betrayal. Despite this it being obvious that this was going to happen, the Indians ignored the warning signs and just believed that the Chinese would uphold their agreement. Also, I forgot to color in something Sri Lanka. So, war has begun. Northern Sri Lanka is quickly taken over by the Iranians, who are in southern Sri Lanka. And so India wasn't mobilized for this conflict as I said, they weren't expecting it despite the warning signs. So they're able to quickly invade into this area of um them, and to add more to it, the um the I came from the word Pakistanis join. They surround Calcut and begin sieging it. At least I believe that's where it is. It's probably coastal. I actually think it is coastal, but I don't care. Let's just pretend. And in the Battle of Mumbai, one of the most devastating battles of the war, the Indians are actually able to come on top, and this is where the Chinese and Russians really begin to decline. They fail to take New Delhi, the capital of India, and they're left with this. However, up here in Afghanistan, the Russians are again humiliated for the 60 millionth time, invading into one of their enemies. However, Chinese soldiers will pour in, and the Confederation will fall. And they will quickly divide it up into two regions that are red. And to do it. However, even the Chinese and Russians themselves are horrified by the atrocities committed by this southern one. But anyway, back over here in India, as promised, the Burmese will gain the promised lands that were theirs. Now, the Bangladeshi had originally welcomed the Chinese and Burmese and Thai and Finnish as liberators until they began committing atrocities on them, and then they switched over to, surprisingly, the Indians' side, which is kind of hard to fight to control land with a hostile population towards you. So we'll see how that goes for them. Um, the however, a vital mistake will be made here. Well, it's not vital. What the heck? The heck? What the heck? A mistake will be made here. Well, it's not really a mistake, it's on purpose, but Iran will launch attacks on American positions in Israel and Somalia. Not American, Brazilian positions. Have I been saying American this whole time? Well, um, Brazilian positions in these two places, bringing Brazil into the conflict. Also, I forgot to mention this, but after the fall, um, so the f the f the Malaysians, I believe, or maybe it's the Philippines, the Philip the Filipino, recently bought Papua New Guinea from Papua New Guinea. Um, However, once they failed at controlling it, the Japanese would come in and take control of it. But so Brazil wanted to launch an offensive with making landings um on the coasts of China, but the Japanese wanted to make a push through the weaker Russia and then take out China and then take out Iran, and it would eventually be the Japanese plan that won out. They would immediately send forces here and would push the Russians out of there and even start to liberate the Nordics, which had been under Russian control for some time, and would begin invasions into Russia itself, taking over massive amounts of land here in their territory. Soon, Moscow would fall, and the people of Russia were generally accepting to their invaders as they hadn't been liking their oppressive government for some time. China, not liking what they were seeing, would march into Russia and take over the remainder of it, as they did not want the Russians to surrender. However, the Western advance would be very slow, and they decided that to win this war, they must not try to push through um Russia, but go with their other plan as well. They would land in South Korea and take over the north as well, and would begin pushing to surround Beijing. However, the Indians would make large gains against their attackers as they were not focused on this, and would quickly capitulate um the the Pakistanis. However, the Iranians would be able to push back against the Indians a little. However, India would also then pour into Southeast Asia and decide that they wanted this land for themselves. And so they would take it for themselves. They would invade into the Chinese possessions, not liberating them, but taking them for themselves, and would push into China and nearly take Beijing right from out under their nose, the Westerns, and they would take Beijing right from the west before they could reach it. Sweeping across China, they would take Manchuria, and Russia, now effectively having no ruler, would fall over to the west. Invasions would happen into here, which would liberate it. However, Iran would refuse to surrender. So, two, so the Brazilians and the West used a weapon they had been testing for a while and leveled two full Iranian cities with orbital bombardment. The Iranians would surrender, and the war would be complete. So here is our peace treaty map. Now let me know in the comments if you want me to continue the scenario with this map and these country comparisons into the Cold War, because I feel like that could be interesting, but I'm not sure if you guys want to watch that and like make this a series or whatever. But anyway, let's start off with down here in South America with Mexico. Now, Mexico wasn't involved in the war. You guys should know that. But Mexico, well, this is Argentina, but it is Mexico, so I'm going to refer to it as Mexico. Mexico was the only country to condemn the annexation of Austria by Germany in this timeline. So Argentina was the only country to condemn Chinese annexation of Taiwan in our timeline. Well, in this timeline. And then the USA and Alaska. Blah, 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 you all know that story. Israel was Hawaii and Somalia was the Philippines, if you're wondering. Europe was Africa except for the Nordics. Though those were Greece. And then the Baltics were Albania. Use that to invade Greece. Um, Ukraine was Ethiopia, and Georgia was Libya. Bulgaria was New Zealand, and Turkey was Australia. Those were ones I don't think you would have been able to realize because they didn't do a lot in our timeline war or this one. Libya was Papua New Guinea. I was thinking about dividing it, but then I forgot, like dividing like this half would be the Indonesian half and or the Egyptian half, and this half would be the Australian or Turkish half, but I never got to that. Sudan was Mongolia. Again, you wouldn't have been able to tell that. Ethiopia was India, and already previously mentioned that was the Philippines. Iraq was Manchuria, and Kuwait was Shanghai, and Qatar was Hong Kong. Saudi Arabia was the Republic of China. Syria was Tibet. The UAE and Oman were French Indochina. Iran was Japan. Yeah, I already said that. Afghanistan was Korea. Pakistan was Finland. Kazakhstan was Serbia. Uzbekistan was Slovenia. Turkmenistan was Croatia. Tajikistan was Macedonia, and Kyrgyzstan was Bosnia. If you're wondering why I said that, even the Japanese and, well, not Japanese, Chinese and Russians condemned things that are happening in the puppet that roughly covered this area, is because there were things that Croatia did that China and Russia didn't really like in their territory. Mongolia was Switzerland. It's completely surrounded by China and um Russia, so it's Italy and Germany. North Korea was Vichy France, South Korea was France, Japan was the UK, Taiwan was Austria, Laos was Belgium, Vietnam was the Netherlands, Cambodia was Luxembourg. If you're wondering why here, so in our timeline, Hungary was given Transylvania, so they join. Um, but Bessarabia was stolen away by the Russians, and so Romania actually still joined the Axis to get control over Bessarabia as well, as more lands promised from the USSR. Bangladesh were the Baltics, Nepal was Poland, Bhutan was Czechoslovakia, Finland, I think I already mentioned that. Kashmir was Karelia, as I'm not sure if I had to include that one, but I did. Indonesia was Sweden, Papua New Guinea was Iceland, as previously mentioned. Um, I believe that is all. Don't think I have missed any. Syria and Lebanon were Tibet, if I didn't already say that. And Europe was Africa. But anyway, let's take a look at the peace treaty and all that. So anyway, nothing had changed over here. Um, Europe didn't get many changes. Albania was released. Ethiopia was given as independent, and Georgia and um Belarus, who are Libya and Somalia, got given the United Nations Peace Trust territory or whatever that's called. Nothing changed over here or here. I was originally okay, so these two united into the Republic of China. However, the People's Republic of China is still fighting on in the south. Iran just sits there in its cave. These borders are gray. The other borders gray? I hope not. And if they are, I'm not fixing them. Oh wait. Sure, I can just shift. Um, yeah. So Korea got divided between not Korea, but well, like it is Korea, Afghanistan got divided between the north, which is controlled by India, and the south controlled by the West, specifically Brazil. Now over here in China, Tibet was released. I don't think that has a real world equivalent, so I guess you could say it's like the parts of Poland. Oh, but yeah, this is Poland. Because it's like, it's Nepal. Guys, this is Nepal, not Tibet. I misspoke. Because, like, Nepal was like that, roughly. But, it's the, Indians didn't want to give up their half, so this is Nepal. They're just expanded. This is the Indian control zone of China. The Afghanistan got to live on, that's gonna collapse. If we do the continuation, which again, tell me in the comments if you want that. Um, Nothing happened here. Well, India regained Bessarabia, and these two were put under their influence. Oh, and Myanmar regained that area, which is the equivalent of Transylvania in this. This area is the Brazilian control zone, and this area is equivalent to Bremen. If you don't know about that, look up why did America control Bremen instead of the British after World War II. I'm not actually sure if that will show the results you want to see, but they did, okay? This is the French control zone. I know it's big and it's not as close to France as it was in our time, but that's close enough. It's like this point and this point. Yeah. And also Hainan is independent. Why, you might ask? Well, um, it's the Saarland, okay? Basically, except the Koreans have no realistic claim over it. Speaking of the Koreans, I forgot to incorporate Vichy Korea into Korea. Um, these are the separate Beijing control zones and the blah blah blah. And this is the Japanese one. Now, you may notice that um Russia/Italy is still colored in blue. That's because I wanted to do their peace treaty on camera. Poland gets Kaliningrad. Now you might be wondering, is there more? Yes, there's more. That's it for the Russians. Now, you may notice that they still have their war colors on. Now, the blue colors are ones that have democratic governments that are pro-West. The white ones are ones that are neutral or took no part in the story, which most of the ones that took part in the story are colored in, except for like Tibet, Mongolia, Albania, Ethiopia, Switzerland, Austria, and Sweden. Yellow is their communist and pro-India, who is communist now. Red means that they were Axis and still have their Axis government. Now, Finland isn't fascist. They just have still their pro-Axis government. And yeah. Now, you may notice that there's still one conflict going on, and that is the Civil War in Arabia. Arabia. And so if you want to continue it, again, let me know in the comments. I will, this will be expanded upon, but right now it's just sitting there. Well, yeah. And, thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, and subscribe as we're trying to reach 100 subscribers by 2026, though it doesn't seem too likely now. And again, comment if you want to see continuation of this. And, bye.